Annyeonghaseyo. This is Kyle with Korean Adoptee Stories. This is part of our Real Adoptee Weekly broadcast, and I'm with Travis, who's my twin brother, and also Woo A Yi. My Korean is a little rusty, and she's a Korean author that kind of wants to talk about her book that is discussing a really key topic that's actually happened around like right now, and the Floyd and the police brutality and the black people, and I think she has some really great things to share, and I'll let Travis continue.
So I just want to state that Korean Adoptee Stories is a little bit different than like other social media groups on Facebook. They don't really enjoy, or they don't really like promoting other people's work, but I feel that since we're all CADs, I feel that this is a really good benefit to get to know each other and to help promote each other's service. When we initially were part of this group called Guide, the whole idea was to start this town, CAD town, to help promote other people's services, their passions, their jobs, their services that they might provide. So this is the first step in which we try to get some more information about a CAD who has wrote a book and wants to talk about it, and it relates to the political environment of Black Lives Matter, what's going on with the world today, the current events, and how that relates to Korean adoptees and, in general, Asian people. So we are here to introduce Woo A Yi. She is a Korean adoptee that we're going to get to know a little bit. She has a book that she wants to help promote, and we're going to help her do that. She also wants to discuss some topics related to that book. So why don't we get ahead and get started?
So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Where are you, your name, where are you from, your adoption story a little bit, but go ahead and tell us what you would like to share.
Sure. So I go by Woo A Yi. That's my pen name. I was born from Songnam, particularly Songnam Hospital. I was adopted at 4 months old to the DC area. I grew up in Northern Virginia, and then I moved to Denver in 2017.
Okay. Great. So how is your adoption story? Do you actually get well along with your family, or could you describe a little bit about that?
I get along with them now. I haven't always gotten along with them. There was a time period when I was dating a black man, and that kind of made our relationship a little bit more challenging.
Could you describe some of the challenges that you actually faced with that relationship?
So actually, it wasn't just one black man. I dated two black men for a very long time, and I think there were just some concerns around with my father about being part of a black family, and then also one of my exes did not get along with my father very well, and so they just would kind of butt heads.
So with Washington, D.C. area, I assume they're actually probably where you grew up. I assume there's actually it's pretty diverse, and there's probably black people. And how about Korean adoptees, or were you the only one in school, or could you describe that a little bit?
Right. So interestingly enough, when I went to high school there, and I was in Fairfax County, I felt that it was only like 1% minority. So I really felt like I was surrounded by white people. However, now I look at the demographics and it's like 25% Korean, and I'm like, how did that happen, and why wasn't I there when it happened?
I think that's a lot of Korean adoptees actually kind of experience that. I think even with my brother and I, we actually grew up in a pretty white town. We grew up in Hastings, and there wasn't a lot of a multicultural diversity until we actually got into college. So when did you start coming across multicolored people and I guess black people? Was it young, or were you a little bit older?
Oh, I mean, I've seen diversity like even when I was young. Actually, my first memory of seeing someone who is black, my only memory was I said, you didn't color in the lines.
So I guess there's another question. I think you have a really great perspective since you are around a lot of black people. Were your family racist at all, or did they just kind of had to get used to being around different people than themselves?
So my father I'm going to be a little careful here. So my father, he had a black coworker he got along with well. He, did not see himself as racist. I actually talk in the book about how the reason why it's so challenging to broach this topic right now is because a lot of white people see the word racist as a slur, even though a lot of other people don't think it is. It's taken that way.
That actually leads us into a great topic. So, like with the police brutality, but with black people, but you being a Korean adoptee and not black, what has been your perspective? What is your a viewpoint of the things going on with the world right at this moment?
So with the whole George Floyd incident, everyone has become a lot more aware of, even if it's always existed, these issues. Some people are still not willing to face the reality, but I think more people are willing to understand or at least learn about what's happening. Honestly, this has been going on for quite some time, a very long time actually, and some people have just not been paying attention. So the book actually, it's called The Relationship Between CADS and the Black Community 92 to 20. And the reason why I say it says 92 is because when I first started writing this, it was back in 2007. So I had no idea that George Floyd was, going to come up in the future. I was really just focused on the Rodney King incident in 1992.
If you could explain a little bit about the Rodney King.
For those
we're
that
pretty
don't
young,
know.
so I don't recall that. Could you just explain a little about?
Sure. So it's been called the 92 LA uprising. It happened around what happened was that Rodney King was being beaten by several police officers. There were a lot of parallels to what happened with George Floyd. It was 4 police officers. But the thing that makes it unique is the fact that it also involves Koreans. So Koreans were portrayed as the bad guys. And what happened is that the media portrayed them as being rich business owners, and a lot of riots were taken out against these Korean business owners. However, what I mentioned in the book that, or at least someone I interviewed mentioned in the book, is that what really happened was that the police were funneling the uprising towards the Korean area, the Korean town. So that's why they were able to spin the media that way, so that they could make it sound like there's a battle between Asians and the black community, whereas it was really more a battle between the black community and the white community, or at least white police.
And it seems like the Asian people, the Korean people became collateral damage, you're saying?
Yes. And so that's also affected how sometimes black people have perceived us, unfortunately.
So with us being collateral damage, you still support the Black Lives Matter movement, even though it kind of involved us, and what is your perspective? And maybe you could describe a little bit more about the book of what you wrote about as well.
Right. So even though I start off talking about the 92 incident, I also want to say that this is how some people perceive the relationship between Koreans and the black community, but I do want to emphasize that things are a lot better than they look on the surface, because that was all a media portrayal, which is not necessarily true. And also, I got interested in this book because, like I was saying, I was dating a black man at the time, and I was very interested about it because there's a lot of information about Korean adoptees being married to white men, or Korean adoptees being married to Korean men, but you don't see a lot of information about Korean adoptees being married to black men, for example.
I think that's true. Do you actually have any kids with I guess if I could call them Blasians at all, or no?
No.
Oh,
so
okay.
my husband is white.
Okay.
And my husband was very supportive of me doing this.
I guess I have one question. So regarding using Koreans as collateral damage, was the whole story about where a black person was getting in fight with a Korean businessman, and then the police got involved and ended up beating this businessman for this black guy for infringing upon the Korean business, or what was the story behind that?
I didn't actually focus particularly on that story, but I do want to put a little bit more context in this. So there was what led up to this and what also added to the media portrayal was that a woman named Latasha Harlins was a black girl, 15 years old. She was going to buy a $2 orange juice, and a Korean woman shot her in the back of the head. It happened around the same time as the Rodney King incident. So some people have conflated the two incidents together. Some people don't even know about it because it's been hidden in history because for whatever reason, the media does not want to keep it alive.
So as plain as devil's advocate, I guess, there probably could be some people that kind of blame the Rodney King incident for the death of Koreans, kind of, because they are using them as collateral damage. But you actually have an empathetic heart towards the black people. Could you actually describe a little bit why, and maybe a little bit more about the other experiences that you've written in your book as well?
Right. So I got interested in this book because I was dating a black man. I also mentioned the hard reality that sometimes both of us would have internalized racism, both against ourselves or against each other. And it's unfortunate because, we thought that we loved each other and everything like that. But I really wanted to dissect and understand where did this come from, and why is it there, and what can we do about it, etc.
I'm going to be open about this. I really am glad that you came up with me with this topic because as a Korean adoptee, I'll be honest, I don't think both my brother and I aren't as informed of what it's really like living as a black person. And my brother and I tend to be we don't tend to take things as seriously as we should. And sometimes it gets taken into wrong context. And the thing is, when we were actually working with Guide, my brother actually posted a picture of himself, of an avatar of a black person, but a lot of people got offended by that. Can you explain a little bit about the importance of even though an avatar is someone that you can make whoever you want to be in a way? I think now that these times have become so sensitive, it's really not appropriate to actually make yourself any particular race, especially the black people, especially with everything that they have gone through. I was wondering if you have any perspective about that.
Right. So I think it kind of comes down toward privilege. So there's a word out called kyriarchy, which pretty much is, it's like patriarchy plus all the other kinds of ways that people have privilege. And so right now during this time, we're really focused more as a nation on people who have less privilege to kind of raise them up a little bit more. And people who have privilege do not necessarily know the history behind everything that they might not take seriously. So like, of course, Blackface, as you mentioned, is a very serious topic in the history of black people because it was used during slavery times and it was used as a way of entertainment at their behalf. At their expense. And and then also kind of things like appropriation and things like that, I think I should mention that it's important to understand what the history is. So for example, with African American hair, they're still to this day not allowed to wear traditional styles in the workplace. Whereas people who are more privileged are able to wear those same styles and be applauded for it. Whereas they weren't born that way and they weren't, they didn't have to use that hairstyle as, one of the very few options available.
Are you talking about like cornrows or afro or
Yes.
both or maybe? Okay.
Yeah, both.
They ban them in schools too, I think I heard saw a post one time.
Right. Schools, workplaces, etc.
So how long did this book take you to write, and when did you start writing this? You said you started this in 2007, and then I guess now you were able to finish the book. What kind of inspired you to finish it?
So I started in 2007. It actually was part of my thesis. My thesis was about Korean adoptees. I ended up being so enthusiastic about writing about Korean adoptees that it ended up being 1,000 pages. So naturally, I had to cut a lot of material, and I decided to focus just on Korean adoptees. However, because of how I was feeling during that time period and where my life was, I really wanted to return to that topic at a later date. And I just felt that 2020 was that appropriate later date for me to go back to it.
So could you give us a little bit of details about the book? So you talk about what we were talking about earlier. What else do you actually discuss in the book? Actually, I just want to let everyone know I did order the book, but it didn't come here on time. But I thought that we could probably just do an interview, and I thought that Wu A.Yi could explain a little bit about it.
Right. So a lot of the book is not actually just my voice. It's a lot of people's voices. So I also wanted to highlight that I interviewed a lot of people for this book, and so there are a lot of different opinions in this book. I interviewed Korean adoptees, Black Korean adoptees, as well as Rodney King's mentor. And in 2007, I interviewed 7 people, and so I thought it was appropriate that in 2020 I interviewed 20 people to kind of go with the year. So there are at least 27 interviews in the book and a lot of different opinions.
Could you describe some of the general opinions of the people that you interviewed? Was it warm towards what was happening now, or was it negative, or could you describe a little bit about that?
Right. So I actually focused my interviews on people who are sympathetic to the Black community, and even among those people, there was still a lot of diversity of opinion in terms of like the relationship between Korean adoptees and the Black community in general, not just themselves.
I got a question. Since Blasians are Black Korean adoptees, do they have a different opinion outlook since they're both half Black compared to just full Korean-blooded Korean adoptees? Do they have a general sense of like take in which they inherit their Black roots and feel that they are more in a discriminatory type face, or do they have privilege like the rest of the society when they're viewed as Korean adoptees?
So I would say that the Black Korean adoptees, there was more of a conflict about which trauma was worse, being adopted or being Black, because they all had very different experiences with that. I think that it depends a lot on the family as to whether the adoption was traumatic or not, and also at the age that they were adopted. But I would also say that some of them felt that being Black was more of a traumatic thing than being adopted, just because it's something that people see every day. People see their skin color every day, and they react based on that. Whereas not everybody knows that you're adopted unless you actually give that information out yourself.
So in a way, I guess you could say that though they're half Korean, half Black, it seems like they're Black. They're mostly viewed as Black people versus their Korean roots. Is that what you're trying to get at?
For the most part, yes. I think most Black Korean adoptees do relate or identify as Black. I have come across one person who identified more as Korean, but she was not someone I was able to interview.
So could you describe a little bit of the traumas these people actually had? when you're actually doing your interviews? Are you willing to share a little bit about kind of the general thesis about what you actually discovered with your book and your interviews?
Right. So I did talk a lot about trauma because I think that both adoptees and the Black community has some trauma that is not actually being taken seriously by the psychiatric industry, or at least not as seriously as it should. And there are different types of trauma with both of those. And honestly, I felt like I talked more about trauma than they did necessarily, because I think that in a quick like half-hour interview, people don't really want to get that deep. You know, it's just not very comfortable, especially if they don't know me, haven't met me before. So I feel like I actually talked more about trauma than they did it in the interviews, just because of that dynamic.
Can you actually just explain some of the questions you said? You maybe their name, and did you have any trauma, or was there any association with the Black culture? Can you explain some of the questions that you asked during the interview?
So some of the questions I asked were like, which was more traumatic, being Black or being adopted? I talked about their family. Did they have Black parents or white parents, and how did that affect how they were raised? I asked different questions about the relationship they had with other Korean adoptees, and sometimes I asked about their children, if they had any children. So it was a variety. I think most of the questions I kind of kept the same for everyone, but sometimes conversations would kind of veer off into another direction, and I would go with it.
So I guess speaking more about race in general and everything going on, since you seem to have a great lens being a Korean adoptee and also seeing the lens from a Black person, what are some of the solutions that you actually kind of think that would actually benefit what's going on right now? Obviously, you've written a book, and so you're spreading awareness on the issue. Is there anything else that you think you actually know more than some other people that are kind of, hey, this Black Lives Matter is just starting issues, and they don't really agree with it, and they think that they're just attacking the police, and they don't believe in defunding the police? Could you explain a little bit about what you think needs to happen to make the world between less divided between Black people and white people, but also Korean adoptees and other races in general?
Right. Well, there are many ways to help. I particularly focused on talking with our adoptive parents and even birth parents, because I felt that like if we could reach our parents, that we would be able to like make more of a difference, because as you probably know, most Korean adoptees are adopted by white families, majority Christian, some Jewish, you know, people from both sides of the aisle politically. And I feel that a lot of white people are, because of their privilege and because of the company they keep, that they're kind of shielded from the reality. And so the reason why they don't think that there's such a big deal is because no one's actually brought it to them. And I feel that if we can learn more ourselves and be more educated on what the issues are, that we can bring that to the people in our circles, particularly our parents, also siblings possibly. And in addition, I think that beyond just educating ourselves and helping to educate others, it's also important to do like political actions in terms of like, you know, calling up your senator, or, you know, purchasing products from Black-owned companies.
So it seems as though that you mentioned that Blacks are not only targeted when it comes to just the general population, but also Koreans. What is your take like right now presently? Because I've heard of like funding, not funding, but organizations that's like for Asians, for Black Lives Matter, things like that to nature. is there situations that you feel that the black community is still resentful towards Koreans because of that incident that happened back in 1992? Or has people forgive and forget? Or have they become more aware of it, and have they been able to deal with that situation better? Or is there still a clash between the Korean community and black community? Or is it even possible that many Korean adoptees associate with the minorities of black people?
So there are a lot of questions there, but I will try to answer them. So I think a lot of this depends actually on location. Like, for example, if you're in a city, or if you're in a farm, or if you're in the suburbs, and what is the demographics of your area, and what kind of, you know, like, for example, so I mentioned that Baltimore, for example, has a huge black population. And LA, despite what the media would have you believe, actually has mostly an Asian population. And there are a lot of other states in between, and cities in between, where there's all different kinds of mixes of things. And so it really, a lot of times it also depends on exposure. If people haven't been exposed to a lot of black people, then they might end up having kinds of backwards beliefs about them. Same goes for if people haven't been exposed to Korean people. And so I think a lot of the challenge is just like getting more exposure to people. And sometimes that kind of means like having to go into like even like Hollywood or something, which I don't know is going to happen anytime soon, because we know how much Asian representation there is in Hollywood. But I think that it's also important to just have deep conversations with people. Like, for example, I think that in like Northern Virginia, there are a lot of people who are, a lot of black people who are okay with Koreans. But if you get into like maybe a deeper part of DC or maybe Baltimore, then there might be some negative beliefs towards Koreans just because they haven't really been exposed, or they only believe what the media tells them.
So what's the best situation or the best proposal that you have in terms of like, hey, this incident happened like quite a bit a long time ago. I just want you guys to realize that, you know, we as Korean people are not as bad as what the media attacks us at, or takes us as. What do you think's the best solution when it comes to like the interactions you do have in DC, where black people are a little bit animated towards the Korean community? Is there anything that could be done potentially, or is it something that there's really nothing that can be handled for that?
Right. And also, in addition to that, I would say that a lot of the people I interviewed had different opinions as well. Some people are more positive and other people were more resigned. But I think that in order to like, you know, unite everybody, it just goes back to, again, like exposure. Sometimes it takes a higher level of exposure, like not just like saying hi and waving, but like maybe inviting someone into your home, and like getting to know them over dinner or something. And also just a lot of representation can also happen with HR, with hiring the right people, but also people who are qualified. And a lot also happens to be at the higher level. So a lot of times people will look at who are the CEOs of a company, and if it's all white people, then, you know, maybe their talk about diversity is just kind of like just, you know, to make themselves sound good. But you really have to look at those different levels of like, you know, like, and it's not necessarily hiring people to like fill a quota. It's more like hiring people that are qualified and recognizing that they're qualified, and not choosing someone else just because they happen to be white. So I think a lot of change can also happen at the corporate level.
I was curious. This kind of reminds me of a Netflix documentary I was like watching a while ago about black people and the criminalization, and that I think that I don't remember the exact statistic, but there's a lot more black people in the criminal system because of the war on drugs, and since a lot of black people were caught up in that, they didn't have as much privilege as some of the white people or even the Asian people, that a lot of them were kind of trapped in the prison system. Are you aware of this issue, and did this come up at all in your book at all? Or?
Right. So I've read a couple of books on anti-racism, and one of the books that I most highly recommend is actually The New Jim Crow, which is a book by Michelle Alexander. You can also get it on audiobook. And she does a great job of really getting into the nitty-gritty facts and figures and not just opinions. So the facts and figures are still astonishing and astounding every time I hear them. For example, there are just some things that I remember, like a lot of people don't realize this, that the reason, so when prisoners leave prison and they've done their time, they're released to their family. Well, unfortunately for black families, they're really hesitant to bring in their black family members, even if they are family, because of the laws in place. So, for example, if that person is has a moment of recidivism, or like, you know, gets back into drugs for like a moment, or selling or whatever, the people that can get punished for it are not just that one person, but also their family members, even if they don't know that that's been happening. So, for example, people have been able to go to prison if, like, their grandson was selling pot, and they happen to be like a senior who needs to be taken care of. It's very unfair how this is all unfolding. And a lot of people don't realize about things like this happening.
Do you feel, I guess I'm just related to the George Floyd incident, the police, do you feel like right now the best opportunity for black people to not become targeted is that the police need to take responsibility for their actions, behaviors when it comes to violence? Do you feel that
Yes.
is a good solution to get the target off black people's back?
Do you actually agree? Do you actually think defunding the police is something that needs to be done, or you don't know?
So I think that a lot of people feel that defunding the police might also be a little bit of an extreme reaction. But I do feel that there are ways that they can be channeled to other ways. So, like, I feel that they should have like social workers at the ready, because most of their calls are actually social work related, and so it's not appropriate to put a cop who's trained like a soldier in that situation when what they really need is maybe like financial assistance or something.
So I'm curious. So since the media, everything is like pretty much blasted in public now. So is this stuff what you see in the media, where like the police being brutal against the black people? Is that more of a, is that the media more focusing on that, or is that actually really happening? And has that always happened in the past, since like 1992, like your book states? Has this been going on like for a long time?
Right. So there's actually a wall in the UK, because these kinds of things actually go far beyond just America. There's a wall put up in the UK that names every single person's name who was unjustly killed by a police officer. And it is astonishing how many names are on that wall. You might be able to Google it.
And what's your viewpoint on the people that say all lives matter? Do you think that's racist still, and people have to stop doing that and be more aware?
So I do think it is racist, and I can understand why it's racist. So the situation is that the reason why people say Black Lives Matter is because what has been happening historically is that Black lives have mattered less to the justice system, and that is particularly focused on the justice system, with cops and also prosecutors and so forth. And I think that when people say that all lives matter, they're not taking into account that historical fact.
So I guess the one question is that why do you think people should read your book? Is there something that you want them to get at or learn from, or what's the one thing that you'd like to get people to
Your
be
main
aware
message about this book. That's
Right. So I really want people to take away from this book why people might think that there is a bad relationship between Korean adoptees and the Black community, and to also realize that it's not as bad as it sounds or looks, and how all these facts happened, how they all work together, how it all came to be. It's very intricate. The things that I'm dealing with, the subjects I'm talking about, they're all very intricate and all very detailed, and you can't just like have a quick one-liner to kind of explain everything.
Well, it seems like you can't generalize a lot of the situations that you interview.
Right.
because everything was all individual experiences,
Right.
not just black and white, perhaps.
Right.
So is there anything else that you'd like to add with your book? The racism, the Black Lives Matter, the police brutality. Is there anything that you think that we may have missed? And I think after this, we'd like to delve a little bit more into your own traumas or your own adoption experiences, if you could.
So there were a lot of topics that came out in the book, some topics that I anticipated coming out, and also some topics I did not anticipate coming out. So I also wanted, since I talk about how it's not just one broad brush for everything, I think I wanted to highlight that everyone has such unique experiences. So there are Black adoptees who have Black parents, Black adoptees who have white parents. We've got Korean adoptees who have parents who are not typical of most Korean adoptees. We've got situations of abuse. We've got situations where they had happy homes. I mean, everyone has such a diverse experience, and I just wanted to highlight the diversity of that experience, and that we take all of that into account.
Thanks. So I guess I wanted to ask, I know that you came across a lot of people that were generally positive towards the Black Lives Movement, you said. So what about those people that are actually rather kind of apathetic? How do we actually encourage the people that actually aren't listening and aren't seeing the reality of things and trying to kind of brush it off? Is there any other pointers that you could actually help people kind of listen about these topics that are going on, especially with the racism in Black people?
Right. So if you learn anything about anti-racism, there are actually lots of different, there are some new words that have come out of it. So some of that is calling out versus and calling in. I personally do not like the idea of calling out because I feel that it embarrasses people. I prefer much more to call people in. So people that I think, if only they understood more what the issues are, what the history is, and so forth. My ideal is to call people in to say, hey, look, I heard you say whatever, or I noticed you do whatever, and this is why there's an issue with that. And there's a lot of maybe historical background you might not know about it, and I wanted to enlighten you about that.
You seem actually really well learned about Black Lives Matter and stuff, and the Black systemic racism. Could you actually offer some other, aside from, of course, reading your book, is there any other material that you could actually offer to people that are kind of curious about the Black racism in history? Do you have any other good books that they could read, or movies, or documentaries, or TV shows like that?
Right. Well, I actually mentioned those also in my book. But another thing, I think, it's not necessarily a book or a movie or anything, but there's an organization called Hollaback, and it actually teaches people not just around race, but also around all different kinds of harassment, like how to handle harassment situations, and also as a bystander.
I guess someone who's a little bit more ignorant when it comes to the Black community, I hear a lot of stories when it comes to, white versus Black, but there's very little compared to Asian versus Black. Do you feel that the subject matter when it comes white person, black person
Polarized.
is more polarized than Asian versus black? Or do you feel that they're one and the same? Or what's your take on that?
So being Asian at this time is a very complicated thing. So some black people, because of our model minority stereotype, lump us in with white people, and that's why they're not as fond of us. Whereas other people might realize, oh, we're just minorities like them, and we're not like white people at all. So it's really kind of interesting to see how people have different opinions based on their own assumptions. And also, it can also have a lot to do with like how you behave. If you behave like you're privileged, then they might lump you in with white people. If you behave like, you know, you've also been wronged, then they'll like see you as one of them.
I got a question. I hate to generalize the people in your book since everyone has their unique environment and experiences. But generally, did you feel that most Asians associate with the minorities, or do you feel they mostly associate with white privilege, having like adoptee white parents, or what's your take on that?
So, and this is just from what I've heard from other people, but I feel that there is a sense that the Korean adoptees who are more aligned with the Black community feel like minorities within their own Korean adoptee community, because a lot of Korean adoptees being raised by white parents still sometimes feel like they are white themselves, or they haven't even acknowledged their Asian side.
How about black people? Like, you did interview black adoptees or like Blasian adoptees? I'm just curious.
Both.
Oh, both. So my question to you is, the black adoptees with white parents, did they often associate themselves as black, or did they associate themselves having white privilege, or what's the take on that?
So the thing is, being black is a lot more kind of in your face than being Asian. Asian's kind of also seen as the invisible minority, unfortunately. But being black, I mean, it's very much like people react to it more. And so even for a black adoptee raised by white parents, they're always going to still see themselves as black majority for the most part, and they might even end up dating and marrying into a black family.
I think it actually this kind of reminds me of someone. I've been actually chatting with someone who's actually adoptee but been raised by white parents, and I was kind of surprised to hear her side of the story, that she's kind of not supportive of the Black Lives Matter, and it made me kind of think that maybe it's the person's upbringing that kind of influences on what they kind of believe. And like if you're more with a white family, you tend to be more white-minded and probably have that privilege, versus if you were like adopting a black family, you probably end up having that idea that racism and all the struggles that they have to kind of have within their family is just kind of an interesting thing that I heard from this black adoptee woman.
Yeah. So for example, like I have a friend who's Korean adoptee, but also very much supports Black Lives Matter. And she told me the other day that like she appreciated that like I also support Black Lives Matter, because actually very few Korean adoptees that she knows, you know, I might have a different experience, but they don't really focus on Black Lives Matter so much, or they don't really, you know, they aren't learned about it, they haven't read about it, they might not know or believe it exists, that it's a situation. So there is that.
I think a lot of adoptees, maybe Korean adoptees or adoptees in general, they're kind of dealing with their own traumas that they also feel like they haven't been given a voice to, and I'm sure maybe you can relate. So it must have been kind of an interesting experience, you trying to heal from your own issues being adopted, and when you're dating a black person and the racism that he experienced. It must have been quite of an interesting experience for you, I'm guessing.
Well, it was also a bit of a shock because, they always treated me, as their daughter, but like when it came to someone outside who I aligned with, that all of a sudden it was a different situation. Like, and this is just an example, but like my my parents, I think, wanted to see me as the young child that they knew at 5, right? And so the idea that I would be espousing things that were more progressive, they thought that I was brainwashed. And so they would call me brainwashed to my face. And that kind of hurts,
I guess that kind of brings up to Prius my own question. So you kind of had that struggle of trying to influence your parents that, hey, these issues exist and you're not listening. Were you able to get it through their heads, or how were you able to approach that issue, or is it something that you can't talk about with them at this moment?
So they are, I have to be very patient with them sometimes.
Maybe that's just the general words of wisdom for dealing with other people that even are outside of family that aren't as aware of these issues, that maybe it's best to be calm and not patient and not kind of instigating things and starting riots.
Right. So I think, so there are several Korean adoptees who are of the opinion that it is better to break ties with their parents than to be racist. And, I think that there's kind of a middle ground somewhere. I think it's better to keep ties with adoptive parents, even if it might be a challenge, because you never really know when that moment is when a light clicks on, so I know a lot of adoptees can probably relate to being raised in a Christian background, for instance. And, the idea with Christianity, which is different from being Jewish, is that there's more of a proselytizing element. And so sometimes the idea behind what I'm trying to say is that the idea is that like if you were Christian and talking to an atheist, then you still like don't necessarily give up on them just because they have a certain belief. You still, share what you know of, your religion or whatever. And, maybe one day things will change, but you don't necessarily just give up on people.
I think I actually agree with you there, and it kind of brings up another topic. Are you actually for adoption, or are you against adoption, if you don't mind sharing about that?
So I believe that adoption is an industry fueled by money. That is my opinion.
You're not alone. There's actually quite a few adoptees that believe. Well, a lot of adoptees believe it's childhood trafficking. Are you at that level where you feel it should be stopped, or you're not even sure about that?
I feel that there should be more support for single mothers. So it's interesting. So with my birth family, I still haven't really had a reunion with them yet. But like with my birth family,
It's sorry to stop your train of thought. So you actually do know who your birth family is, it sounds like?
well, sort of. So I know my birth mom's name. I don't know her address. I don't know how to contact her. I don't know the rest of my family.
Okay. Are you aware if they're alive at all or not? Or
They are alive.
Okay, great.
I'm just not able to contact them right now. I do actually have someone who is reaching out.
Have you tried? We actually met our birth family because 10 years ago I wrote a letter to my. Your adoption agency that you're adopted to here, right?
Yes.
Have you ever tried reaching out to them, asking if you guys could help connect me with the family in Korea, or?
Right. So I am what you call a forever searcher. So I have gone through my adoption agency. I have gone through KBS. I am currently going through NCRC. I have tried DNA, all different types of DNA.
23andMe and stuff,
Yeah.
and so no luck there.
Have you
Right.
had a chance to, have any close cousins or relatives or?
Through one of those services at all? Or?
So I do have a lot of extended family, and that's why I'm still persistent, whereas some people might have given up by now.
So you said you're adopted at 4 months. I think you're probably older than me just because you wrote a 92. I didn't know about the 90. I was born in 87, but I wasn't aware of the 1992 incident.
Probably were like
what was
5,
your? What, I
6
guess
or-
you don't have to say your age, but what was the date that you came over?
Yeah, I was adopted in '84.
Okay.
84, okay.
Okay, so maybe that's in between where you should have records and where you shouldn't. What do
You're
you
not
think?
too-
What
'cause
is
you're not
your
too old.
what is your take on that?
On records?
Yeah, like your adoption records.
'Cause a lot of the older folks don't have records at all, and a lot of it's just fake records with fake birthdays and like fake everything, fake names too.
I think records are essential, particularly for finding people. I am, like, even just beyond birth records, like, I am a huge proponent of records. I have 3 different I have 2 file cabinets, and I'm going to buy a 3rd one. So I just feel like you can't ever have too many records.
Do you believe in open adoption then, that they shouldn't privatize the parents, or what's your take on that?
I support open adoption, but I do understand that sometimes there are some. Of course, no one comes into the triad without having some sort of pain, and you never really know what the birth parents' pain points are.
There's different. You mentioned pain, so there's different levels of pain when it comes to the identity, when it comes to your adoption search. Let's say the scenario is you're having, like, there might be a scenario where you don't find your parents. There might be a scenario where you do. Would that make or break your life right now? Would it affect everything on your identity? Would it tear you up inside? Would it make you feel like it's something you cry about? Or is it something that you feel like, yeah,
You could find peace
it's not
with
the
it,
end
or
of
let it
the
let it
world,
go.
but I can find assurance with it.
So I think that everyone needs to kind of have some sort of level of expectations. So I understand that a lot of reunions do not actually end
And
as
happiness.
positively
Yep, exactly.
or happily ever after. But despite knowing that, I still am very driven because, and I don't know, it might just be a personality thing, but I'm a very curious type person. I want to know everything. I want to know, like, the circumstances of my birth, what I have in common with my extended family. I want answers. And I think there are lots of people like me who want answers.
To me, on the outside, you actually seem like a
If you had a thesis, I assume you at least had a bachelor's or master's.
Yeah, you must
degree.
be a
Is that
pretty
correct?
prestigious type person and pretty know herself. So,
Right.
have you ever dealt with any other with your trauma of not knowing yourself, with your perhaps maybe you had abandonment issues in your relationships? Did any of that creep up in your life? Did you ever feel like you had to drink or do drugs to kind of numb the pain, or are you actually that kind of person that's kind of, hey, I got to one step forward and I don't need to put myself in those positions? Because I do know some people that had horrible adoptive experiences, and they end up
like there's some people
abusing
I know
themselves and
that
stuff.
that they do the search and then their birth family doesn't want anything to do with them.
And then their whole life crashes and
And
they're
then
unable to move on from it, unfortunately. And I guess that's kind of why I wanted to reach out to a lot of Korean adoptees and gather their experiences and maybe their words of wisdoms and maybe some advice that they could offer to these people. And maybe I was wondering if you actually kind of relate to those struggles at all.
Right. So when it comes to things like addiction, I want to make it clear that we don't. So addiction is a coping mechanism that is also tied to a feeling of shame. Now, I don't necessarily want to connect it like strongly to adoption itself. I just would connect it to the feeling of shame, which can come from adoption. The reason why I don't want to conflate it is that it ends up being like a never-ending thing. You can conflate addiction with being LGBT. Well, like, being LGBT doesn't make you addicted. It just means that, like, you're dealing with so much stuff that ends up leading to shame, that ends up leading to addiction. But they're not, is not inherently connected.
So do you think a lot of mental health struggles are common amongst the Korean adoptee community? Have you come across that? a lot.
Well, honestly, I think mental health issues are kind of common to the human experience. But I did also mention in my book that there is a high rate of like suicide ideation or actually going through with suicide or different things related to suicide in the Korean adoptee community.
And coming across that information, have you come across anyone that could offer words of wisdom about trying to lower that statistic down and have Korean adoptees and their mental health struggles? What kind of things, perhaps maybe in your own experience, that could you could provide to those type of people that are struggling with that right now?
So I would say that people who are struggling right now, that one thing that they can be comforted in knowing is that like a lot of us have been there. It's not unique to them. The particular experience might be unique to them, but like feeling that down, knowing that you're going through all sorts of emotional stuff. I mean, this is not, this is common. I think a lot of Korean adoptees have gone through that. I remember I told a Korean adoptee friend of mine that, I had some challenges with suicidal ideation when I was younger. And she just said that like a lot of Korean adoptees have that. It's just, I hate to say, it's not like, I wouldn't say that it's like, a rite of passage, but I mean, it's just like, it's an experience that a lot of us have all had at some point or another. And that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We can all get through it, just, find your support network.
So I guess one thing related to your book, you mentioned that your book mentions a lot of people who have the experiences as adoptees, whether they're Black or Asian or Korean adoptee or mixed. My question to you is, does the book provide any answers or advice when it comes to the conclusion, or do you still feel it's all up to the individual and everyone's experience is different, so you can't really make a judgment on that?
So I did kind of, I asked my interviewees about that. They all have their own opinion on the answer to that question. So I would actually kind of say that the reader can kind of come to their own conclusions based on what they see other people's opinions are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I guess I wanted to ask you one question. So you said this is a thesis, was a written thesis. Do you have like a PhD or a master's in something, or what was?
I do have a master's.
Okay. What was your master's in study in? What was your degree in?
Professional writing and editing.
Okay, great. Do you actually have any other books that you have written, or you have any books to write in the future?
So I actually have a lot of books that I've written and published. Most of them are poetry books. I've only recently started using Wu Yi as a pen name. I used to actually go by Ame I, but then it is also a Japanese pen name, and I thought it was more appropriate for me to embrace that I am Korean.
Okay, my last question to you is, my brother wanted to mention that you co-wrote it with Janine Vance.
She was the illustrator, Janine Vance. She's a writer too.
How long have you known her? And because she's also a publisher and publishes their own books, that's why I thought maybe you guys collaborated somehow in the past.
I haven't known her that long, but from what I can tell, she seems like a wonderful person. She is going through a lot of life right now, but I think we all have a hard time in this year with 2020.
Did she edit your book, or was she just something else? What did she do? What was her role with your book?
It said she was an illustrator, so she did the drawing.
She was an illustrator, yeah.
Okay, so another thing is, I guess I have a general question when it comes to publishing your own book. Is there a lot of work, expenses, investment? How do people do it? Because
do you have to go through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears when you're writing this, or is it pretty
there's Korean
easy for you?
adoptees I know that want to start publishing their own books, and I'm just curious if it's really something hard to do, or is it something that you can easily learn?
So I don't know about everyone's experience. I feel like my experience has been challenging in a particular way, it's not so much the writing or the editing that's difficult for me, or even the formatting, but what I have found to be the most challenging is that there are a large number of unseemly scam type companies out there that just want to take your money. And I feel that they don't necessarily give a book justice. So I'm still hoping that like in the future I can like really kind of find a way where I'm safe from all of that.
So do you have your own publisher, or do you do it through Amazon and have like people read it through there, or how do you get your work published? Because you said you had a physical copy sent to
I heard it's pretty expensive to actually put it in print. I know I don't have a Kindle, but it's great that you actually had a print available for it. Was that did that require a lot of funds for that?
It wasn't the worst. So I did use a publisher for that book. However, there is also the option of just publishing directly through Amazon itself. And some people can choose to do that because that way they get 100% of the royalties.
So
what was your reason why you chose a publisher? Just because it made things easier, or they were able to distribute it, or?
I think it also had to do with at the time I was working with someone that I trusted, and I just had a good relationship with that particular person. And I think it also helps to have a publisher for like formatting. They know some things that I might not know. They can get things into Amazon that maybe I don't. There might be things about Amazon I don't know. So, and I just felt that like it also is good for maybe what's the word, credentials, or I just feel that people take books more seriously when they're published by a publisher.
Could you describe your day-to-day life? Are you actually a full-time writer then, or do you do a secondary job, or?
I am a full-time writer, but I don't work in creative writing full-time. I work in creative writing, on the side.
So are you someone who writes for the newspaper, magazine? Is that what it is, or editorials, or blogs?
I'm actually a proposal writer.
What's that experience like?
It's kind of like being a grant writer. I pretty much work on a proposal a week, which is actually quite a lot.
Let me ask you, did Guide ever reach out to you to write their grants for them at all?
No.
Oh, okay.
I don't necessarily want to like put up front with a volunteer organization that I write that, because I really see it more as like my full-time job and not something I want to do as a volunteer.
Okay, gotcha.
Oh, I see.
So I guess when it comes to writing, do you have any other ideas and plans for your next projects, or how has the 2020 been for you? It's been, for us, and I think maybe a lot of writers perhaps are more like introspective and they like to be alone. How has the 2020 been with you? Are you a type of person that is introverted, and were you able to get a lot of stuff done, or how has it been for you?
So my personality type is what is considered the most extroverted of the introverts. So I'm kind of a mix. It's actually been pretty good for me because as an introvert, I do like being at home, but as an extrovert, I do like being on Zoom.
So you're an ambivert.
Yes.
So aside from this project, were you able to get a lot of written stuff done, or what things have you been doing for this past year before we enter the new year?
So actually another book project of mine is I have submitted a screenplay to several movie companies. It's a completely different topic, or it's basically a rom-com, but with a minority casting.
Oh, great. Yeah, because I know there's a few Korean adoptee plays that we actually seen.
Janine Vance wanted to do something screenwriting too. I think she published a few as well. I don't know if she
Oh,
told
that's
you
cool.
that. I honestly feel you guys could relate a lot since you both like to write. So I don't know if you
Right.
reached out to her frequently or not. It's been a while since I reached out to her, but she's been really busy. I heard she's really busy till January because she has a lot of projects.
Janine did reach out to me recently, so I'm going to send her a copy of my book.
Oh, that's good. Cool.
So what was your role with Guide, actually, since you actually did know them? I actually wasn't even aware that you were part of their group. What did they ask you to do?
So actually, I was the curator for the LGBTQ building.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Maybe you were in one of the chats then at one point. So I guess, is there anything, other questions that you want to probe about? Or
do you want to talk a little? Do you have to go, or do you want to talk a little about your adoption?
What time is it, actually?
Sure, I can talk.
Okay, so I guess you were adopted in 1984.
Yes, I was adopted in 1984, yes.
You were born when?
In 83.
And then, so I assume you were adopted sometime in March or
February.
February. Okay. So,
And what town was that again? I'm sorry.
Songnam? Songnam is a suburb of Seoul.
Seoul. Okay, gotcha.
so this was in your written records. Is that correct? That you knew you were from there?
Yes. Well, I knew with the records. I didn't. When I grew up, I thought that the only thing that I had was my name and my birth date.
Okay.
But when I got my records, then all of a sudden, a whole new world opened up for me.
When did you actually get your records then? Were you a
adult.
kid or an adult or?
So I was the curious type. So I think probably right when I was legal, I probably reached out to get them.
Okay, that's still pretty young then.
I also did something that a lot of adoptees don't consider, but I actually sent a FOIA letter to USCIS, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they actually sent me back a lot of information that I didn't necessarily get from my adoption agency.
That kind of brings up a topic. Are you actually naturalized then? Did you struggle with not being naturalized or?
I'm naturalized. I was naturalized when I was 5.
Okay, great. Okay.
I honestly would not have been able to be in my field if I were not, unfortunately. I do feel for those who are not able to get their citizenship, and I feel that that is really a shame.
Why did your parents wait till you were 5? Couldn't they do it right away when you came, or?
I think at the time they had to wait until I was 5. I'm not sure.
Oh, I see. Okay. So I guess, do you have any siblings or?
So I don't have any. I was not raised with any siblings. I do have 3 siblings that I don't know their names of. I don't know their names.
Like in Korea or here?
In Korea.
Oh, you do? Okay.
So I have a sister who's 5 years older. I have a brother who's younger than me, and then I also have an 11-year-old half-sister.
So when you went through those records, were you like smiling and kind of like happy? Did you find a sense of wholeness when you kind of found this information at all, or could you describe some of your feelings at that time when you were 18?
Yeah, I was very surprised, I think, because I had a lot of information in my records actually that I was not expecting to get. So I found out that I have 5 aunts and an uncle. My birth mom did not go to higher education. I think that she married into a more well-to-do family. I also got access more recently to a pre-flight report, and it doesn't really help me in terms of searching necessarily, but I just thought it was really cute because it talked about what I was like as a baby, and I just thought that was cute.
I'm sorry, what was your Korean name again? It was
So that's my pen name.
Well, was that your adoptive name given to you or?
No,
Oh, no, it's not. Okay.
it's just a name that I made up.
Do you have your birth name or no?
Yes.
You do. Okay.
My birth name is Lee Bok-young.
So I guess I wanted to ask you, how come you wanted to choose a pen name versus using your adoptive name, or do you find yourself not associating with that at all, or do you not have a feeling towards it?
So I do associate with my birth name, but I chose a different name for my pen name just because. So my original pen name was Ame I, and the Korean translation of that is Woo A Yi.
Oh, okay, cool.
Does it mean something or no?
It means rain love.
Oh, rain love. Okay.
Okay, so growing up, I guess we can go past the baby years. How was your childhood like? I know that you're a single kid, so you didn't have to fight with your siblings or deal with maybe siblings that didn't even look like you. Did you find yourself lonely at all, or were you able to actually connect kind of with the world? And did you find yourself fitting in? As I feel like some Korean adoptees didn't really feel like they felt like they fit in when they were younger, and maybe even now as an adult.
Right. So I did feel kind of solitary, and I do feel that it was actually maybe a benefit to me because it ended up getting me in the career of writing, because I'd spend a lot of time just reading off on my own and kind of living in another, fictional world or something.
Do you have favorite authors that you like to go back to, or?
So, because I'm a poet, my favorite author is E.E. Cummings.
Okay.
Yeah, I know him. I thought you were gonna choose someone I didn't know, but yeah, I know him.
He actually wrote a book that's half French, half English.
Actually, do you actually speak some Korean at all then, or no?
Chogun.
Chokun? Does that mean kind of little? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is there Korean restaurants in Colorado or no? I guess that's unrelated right now, but.
There are a few. There's a restaurant called Soul Barbecue.
So when you grew up in DC, correct?
Yes.
Was there any Korean restaurants, camps that you went to, or any Koreans you knew, or?
Actually, there were a lot of Korean things. So I grew up in the white part of Little Korea. So I just moved a couple blocks or streets or whatever down to Little Korea, and I lived there for about 10 years.
Oh, I see. So when you grew up, but you were in a white area, correct?
Right.
Okay. Did you have a okay experience with the other cultures or the white culture or white appropriation?
Did you experience actually racism too? Is another good question when you're younger and maybe even now.
So it might be. I even though I wouldn't say that the DC area is northern per se, it maybe has like a more northern attitude of. It's very subtle racism. So it's kind of like racism that you don't realize it was racism until you look back on it.
And do you think that affected your upbringing at all as right now? Or I was kind of wondering, maybe that's kind of what inspired you a little bit too, to actually make a book that kind of speaking about racism and spreading awareness in general.
Yeah. So like, for example, I had like 10 bullies in school.
That sounds really traumatic. That doesn't sound like something to brush off.
It just sounds like it was a lot of people to deal with. So,
oh, well, I'm sorry you had that.
Yeah.
Trouble your childhood because you had so many bullies.
Well, I kind of kept within myself. Really, writing has been more like a therapeutic thing for me.
Your outlet, it sounds like.
Yes.
Okay, so that's kind of what kept you on track and on the straight path. So I guess after 18, and you lived in a white area, and then did you move away to go to a school or something like that in college? Or
Yes.
And
yes.
Where did you go to school?
I went to James Madison University. It was, to me, it was a lot more diverse, but
That's what I was gonna ask. Okay.
Someone who came from like a black school, it was very not diverse at all.
Oh, okay. So you actually you actually grew up in a black school then?
No.
Oh.
No, I'm saying like my friend.
Oh, okay, your friend. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then during this time, this is when you actually started becoming more aware of other races, and is that when you started dating?
Yeah, I actually started dating black men my freshman year of college.
Okay. So that's great. It sounds like, how were your relationships? Do you think your adoption affected your relationships at all? Or?
I think that adoption, if you haven't really processed it fully, can be actually detrimental to a relationship because there's all kinds of abandonment issues and so forth.
So I guess my question is then, what was the reason you gravitated towards black people? Is it because there's a lot there, and then you ended up befriending a few, or
Proximity, maybe.
or was there a lack of Asian people,
Or maybe just interested.
disinterest in white people, or what was the reason for that?
So, I don't know. I think it's just how it happened. I don't necessarily think I really, put any
Thought into it.
Yeah.
That's fine.
One interesting thing I wanted to mention, though, about being in college was that so I did know a couple of other Korean adoptees when I was in college. I didn't know any in high school. One of them was my friend, but the other one, I thought this was kind of sad because he was actually kind of a bully to me. And he said, I found out later that the reason that was because he assumed that I was just Korean American. So he took out all his frustration as a Korean adoptee on me because he thought I was Korean American and not a Korean adoptee.
Oh, I see.
Through all that time, he never even knew you were an adoptee, so he's just making assumptions, just going through all that mess.
Yeah. I just thought that was, it's a shame. It didn't have to be that way.
So were you able to graduate within the 4 years, or did you go back to school, or?
Yeah, I graduated.
Okay, great. And what did you major in?
English.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess
Yeah.
between that time, have you visited Korea at all?
Yes, I visited Korea in 2010.
How was that experience?
It was interesting. So now this is just unique to myself. I like being unique because I've been unique for so long that I've kind of embraced being unique. And going to Korea, I felt like I wasn't unique anymore because everybody looked like me.
So you actually really enjoy it that much, and that's kind of an interesting perspective because most people when they go, I feel like some people that when they go to Korea, oh, I belong here, they look like me, but with you, it was a different perspective, it seems like.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I'm not special.
So you never had that calling that you wanted to live in Korea, I'm guessing,
I mean, I might consider living in Korea, like maybe when I retire or something, or later in life.
Okay, gotcha.
I'm curious, since you majored in English, you never thought about teaching English in Korea, or that never passed your
There's
mind?
a lot of
or
adoptees that do ESL lessons
Yeah,
to
that's all, just
support
curious.
themselves.
So, and I guess part of it is because, like having already lost one set of parents, I didn't want to lose another set. So I was a little more clingy with my adoptive parents. And I even had the opportunity to study abroad in England, and I didn't want to do that because I was just too far away from my parents.
So based on that, it sounds like even though obviously every family has some sort of issues,
It
whether
seemed like
adopting,
it
but
seems
you
like
seem to have a pretty good
closeness to
to
them
your family in a way. You're not that type that just wants to
harp on them all
like,
the time
or
and
cut them off or anything like that, huh?
Well, I wouldn't say that we have a perfect relationship. It's more that, so actually one time I asked my parents, what made their marriage a success? Because honestly, in my family, we have a lot of people who've had like 3 to 5 wives.
Gee,
And,
wow.
yeah.
Holy cow.
And my parents were like the first ones to actually stay married. And I asked them what their secret of success was. And they just said commitment. You just make a choice.
It sounded like they really loved each other. Do you feel like your parents love you?
Yes.
That's good.
I guess another question is I don't know if this is too personal, but was there a reason why your parents decided to adopt and not have any additional children on their own,
They couldn't
or
have children of their own.
complications, or
Right. My mom had surgery and was not able to conceive.
did you live pretty much financially in middle class, well off, or what were their occupations when you were growing up?
So my mom was a teacher and my dad worked in the CIA.
Wow. So he has some secrets that he could share to some of us, huh?
Well, he can't share them with me, so I can't share them with you.
Seemed like an interesting job.
Maybe that's why you're in the D.C. area. Because
Yes.
your dad. Is that
He's
true?
working in
Yeah.
the White House,
Yeah.
huh? Oh, I see. That's kind of interesting. So I guess you seem to have a pretty decent relationship with your family. I know it's COVID time. Do you get along with, do you visit them during holidays at all, or?
Well, so we're doing Zoom, because
Okay.
they're very much at risk.
Oh, yep. that's like ours.
Well, I guess additionally, what made you decide to move to Colorado since 2017?
It wasn't the weed, was it?
No.
I'm just kidding.
So I feel that every locale has a different mood, tone, or attitude to it, and I just didn't feel like I lined up with the attitude of DC.
Is the attitude of DC like New York, where it's always bustling, or am I wrong?
Yes.
Oh, it is.
So
Okay.
actually, sometimes it's worse. So I remember one time I was working, and it was a Friday, and everyone in DC was wearing suits and ties, and even the people from New York were doing casual
Wow.
Friday.
Oh, wow. They really take their job seriously.
DC got into the front page news just because everyone was still wearing suits and ties during a heat wave.
Wow. So how long have you been living in Colorado, you said?
Since 2017.
2017. So, and you just found out there's actually Korean adoptees where you live?
Yes.
Do they actually have any local Korean
Groups?
adoptee groups at all? Or maybe you're going to start your own? Or
So I think that they used to be more active, but right now they're not very active.
Oh,
Probably
okay.
because of the COVID.
Possibly.
So you didn't move to Colorado because of your current. You're not married, but your boyfriend and girlfriend,
I am married.
oh, you are married. So
Yes.
did you move because of him, or?
No, I met my spouse here.
Oh, I see. So what was your reason why Colorado and no other state?
So I actually had a list of like 100 different reasons. I was really I'd visited there before, and there was just something about it that struck me. It just seems like a very open-minded place, and that was something that I was looking for, also more of an artsy place. Colorado actually puts more money towards public arts than any other state.
Is rent pretty relatively affordable, or housing, or?
It's affordable compared to DC.
Oh, it is. So I got a question then. How much is an apartment in DC? Isn't it like outrageous?
I found a decent apartment for $1,400 a month.
Yeah, that's pretty. Oh, yeah, that's pretty expensive. Here, it's maybe 2-bedroom. You can get 1,000, 800, 1,000.
1,000. But it doesn't sound as bad as California. California even seems even worse.
Right. I think LA is still pretty expensive. So.
Have you traveled to other places besides Korea?
Well, we've done a lot of travel. I think I would say that in terms of travel, I was privileged.
Oh, really? So have you gone to other countries, or?
I've been to France. I've been to Canada. I've been to Hong Kong.
How was Hong Kong? Was it similar to Korea, or not really?
So the story I like to share is it's kind of funny. So when I went to Korea, the taxi drivers were like, "Where'd you learn your Korean? Because you're obviously not from here." But when I went to Hong Kong, people would come up to me and ask me for directions.
Oh.
Okay, so I think we gathered a lot of information about you. We talked about your book. Most importantly, is there any other last messages that you would like to tell about yourself or our viewers or anyone else that in your mind right now?
Just be yourself. Like everything's gonna work out. Eventually, there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Could you explain what your title is? It's such a long one. I remember it's 1992 to 2020. And what was the title of the book?
So the full title is The Relationship Between Cats and the Black Community, 92 to 20.
By R.A.W. So go out and buy it. The paper book's available, and also along with the digital. The digital one, I actually think it's cheaper than the paperback one.
Is there anything else you want us to do for you, or anything you want to say before we call it quits?
Well, I think that thankfully we're at the end of 2020, and I hope that 2021 is a much better year.
Feel free to reach out to us again if you want to promote your second book.
Sure.
All right. So thanks everyone for joining us today. It was a great topic that we were
And
trying
happy
to,
holidays.
and happy holidays. It's a great topic trying to tackle the racism issue, and it's just excellent that a Korean adoptee, even though she is not black, can still empathize with black people, and that I think that's a really great message that we would like to get across, and she seems to have a very level-headed when it comes to these issues, and I'm really a privilege that she actually reached out to us so we could actually spread this message and share it. Is there anything else? That's it. All right, thank you. Yep, you have a good one.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.